Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Harry and Lloyd. We're really doing it, aren't we, buddy? Let's start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by The Obliterator. When the vibes are right, the vibes you need are in The Obliterator. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And Todd's grooving over there. Welcome to The Pestle. We are analyze and look at films and break them apart, see what they're made of, and like it's a study session as much as it is a review. Things that we can take away and learn. Some of my favorite episodes we do are like the first, right? Someone's early career kind of moves and how did they break out? Even more so if they were able to do it on like a budget. That's always super impressive. Like Following, I thought was really cool just to see Christopher Nolan with $7,000 and 12 months. You know, what does that tell you about what it took for him to make it to the next level, to Memento? Or I'm sure if we were to go look at James Cameron's Roger Corman work, that would be really interesting too. He did Piranha 2, I believe, the sequel to the infamous Piranha. And so, yeah, those are my favorites, man. I really enjoy seeing the ingenuity that it takes as a filmmaker to not just stretch a dollar, but also to do it as creatively as possible, to put your stamp on something to get you noticed. Getting noticed is really hard in any creative endeavor. Yeah, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, 100%. Especially nowadays, where everybody can make anything. You know, it's to be able to stand out is a big deal. When you look at those guys, I think a lot of what they are now comes out in those early films in just little ways. You know, obviously, if you watch, Nolan's earliest film, you're not watching Interstellar, you're not watching Inception, but what you are watching is the story and the way the story is told and what importance is placed on what things, right? And I think that's what helps those guys stand out is obviously they don't have money for CGI, they don't have money for color sometimes, which I think is why that first Nolan film is black and white.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's right. That's right.
But that's genius, right? Oh, we don't have to worry about color because we're making it black and white, and that's how we're going to get away with it. So it's all about the story and how we decided to tell it. And I think that's actually liberating if you think about it that way, which is if you just tell an interesting story in the way that is in your head and you honor that, then you can't help but win. It doesn't mean that you're going to win an Oscar in 20 years, but it does mean that at the end of the day, you can step back and say, I did that the way that I saw it in my head, and I'm proud of it. It also helps that Nolan has an incredible producer in his wife. She's amazing, but I don't know if they were together for that first film. It's a lot of it was him and his brother, or maybe just him. I can't remember. Yeah. But it's just the way that they told the story. And I think that, Sam Raimi, who we're going to talk about today, is another good example of that. Just go in, have a story you want to tell it the way you want to tell it. And at the end of the day, make something that you are proud of and, let the world figure it out.
Dude, completely agree. And Sam Raimi in particular, over the last couple of weeks has been really interesting because opening up his IMDb, this guy was putting in the work. He was putting in the work. Like The Evil Dead came out in 1981. But before that, he had been making short films for 9 years. Like if I count them, he did 6 short films between 72 and 76. And then in 1977, he put out his first feature film called It's Murder, which no one's ever heard of. And it barely cut the feature-length runtime. at like an hour and 15 minutes or so. And then that's 77. And then also in 77, he did 4 short films, and then another 2 short films, 3. Yeah. So like between his feature films, It's Murder and The Evil Dead, he did 7 more short films.
That's wild to finish a film, a feature-length film, and then do 4 shorts that same year. Wow.
That's insane. But it also goes to what we talk about a lot is getting your reps in. Like, it takes so much work. And short films, when it comes to making a movie, is such a good way to go about that. Like, short films much more closely emulate an actual movie than would like a TV show. Those are such radically different formats, TV and movie, that it might sound kind of strange. Like, well, you know, a TV show can run 45 minutes, and yet your 5-minute short film speaks much more to your ability to make a movie, just because of how specific it is. It's one story, it's self-contained. You're trying to build in whatever character arcs, shock factor, whatever it is you're trying to do. You're going to have to figure out a way to get from A to B. And then on top of that, it's all about like visually interesting things happening. TV shows aren't about that. TV shows are, especially in this era, you know, we're about the big wide angle, bright lights, and it's more theatric in style. Short films are all about visual interest and interesting lighting and telling your story very simply and to the point and having dramatic beats. And I can see all of that work going into finally getting to the movie that we're going to cover today. But yeah, there's something to be said for getting your reps in and making a lot of work, going through that process of seeing it in your head, casting, location scouting, tech scouting, and putting the storyboard and shot list together, and then going through that process of executing that and seeing, crap, we storyboarded it this way, but we're in post now. We really needed this shot, and this shot to make the sequence feel complete. And then on top of that, if all that isn't enough, in the 70s, you really didn't have a way to watch movies. If you weren't like going to the cinema, at least I don't think so, because VHS didn't arrive in Japan until 76, and then in America in 77, which means at best, you probably didn't have very many movies to even watch in 77 on VHS. It would take a couple years for that whole process to get up and going. And so Raimi didn't have all of that to reference. Like you and I can go whatever on YouTube, on Netflix, and have so much research that we can do like this show, and be able to put together like, oh, I'm just going to copy that sequence. Even if it's a different genre, tone, style, lighting, all that, the shots themselves can still stand in as a reference point of, oh, this is how you make a scene and sequence feel complete. You're going to need 7 angles for this, 20-second sequence. Now it's going to feel like a real sequence. They couldn't do that, right? Like we have it made by comparison today. So what I don't know if I've ever really heard your thought about reps and getting your reps in. Do you feel like you've gone through that process with music? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you just go do it, and whatever that means to you. So if that means recording, you get in the studio, or if you don't have the money, you find a way to record yourself with your phone. Nowadays, there's no excuse for that kind of thing, for not doing things like that, because everything is so readily available for almost no money. If you have an iPad or you have a phone, then you have a way to record. Yeah, it's not going to sound as good as it would if you went into $1 million studio, but that's not the point. The point is to get it down. If you're talking about playing out live, yeah, I've played thousands of shows like throughout my life and my career. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't get nervous. Of course, you always get nervous, but you feel more prepared. I mean, I'm the kind of person that when I was in my band, I would say I want to rehearse every day, like every single day, because I don't want to feel like when I go up on stage like I'm unprepared. That is the worst feeling for me.
Oh yeah.
So we got in the reps, and we, I think that's super important. Just if no other reason, to know who you are artistically, and what you like and what you don't like. So yeah, I think it's super important, especially in filmmaking, because you have 100 different decisions every hour that you have to make, right? As a director or as a filmmaker in general, right? If you don't have a producer and it's you making it, you're like, okay, well, what if I did it from this angle? Okay, if I shot from this angle, that would cut really well from over here. Okay, cool. It's like a chess game, and in the end, you hope the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that you're making actually fit together. But you don't have those answers while you're making it. And I find it hilarious that I never looked at it like this. I'm going on a little bit of a soapbox here, but I think it's important. Mm-hmm. You see actors where they go in and they make a film, but they don't know what they're making half the time. Like they really don't. They have in their head what this is going to be and what they want it to be, but in the end, they don't have any say in really what it is. And then in the end, they see the movie for the first time, just like you and I do, even though they were the ones filming it. And I think that for an actor, it's super important to have your reps so that you go in. It doesn't matter what your view is necessarily. Like you go in and you have this thing that you're doing, and because I've done it 100,000 times, I know what I'm going to bring to this. But as a director, you need to know how to explain to them what this moment is that you're trying to capture. This one moment. They don't need to know the entire world, but this one moment. And if you haven't, sat down and looked at all of what is the question that the viewer is going to ask here? What is the question that an actor is going to ask here? How should I talk to this actor? How should I tell the lighting guy, this is what I want this light to feel like? You don't know the questions. It's really hard to know the answers. So the only way to get the questions is to do, right? So anyway, yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. And I completely agree. Like the ability to know when you get on set and have that room and space and flexibility definitely comes through preparation, not just of the material, but like you said, going through this process with a bunch of other, whether it's theater or other short films. And as a filmmaker, like what we do, I think on the show is really important to me because all of this is referenceable, right? Like we can now have a short language whenever you're on set with your DP or maybe an actor if they're well studied that says, oh no, you're thinking about this in terms of Evil Dead 2. You need to be thinking about this in terms of the Evil Dead. Like this is, and you can get that shorthand going so that your cinematographer is like, I get it. I'm being too active with the camera. I need to chill and slow down my pacing or whatever. Like it's such an easy way to suddenly speak the same language whenever you're working on the same things with the same frame of references and having that body of knowledge just at the tip of your fingers is really, really useful. Yeah. So with that in mind, man, what are we studying today?
Today we are studying The Evil Dead, Sam Raimi's first version. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause it and go watch it. I think it is streaming on Tubi with some ads and stuff. So because we're going to spoil a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. We'll look at a lot of cinematography, interesting angles. We'll also, of course, compare it somewhat to the follow-up sequel, Evil Dead 2, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. 5 friends travel to a cabin in the woods where they unknowingly release flesh-possessing demons. It's written and directed by Sam Raimi, cinematography by Philo. It's featuring Bruce Campbell as Ash, Ellen Sandweiss as Cheryl, Betsy Baker as Linda, Richard DeManincor as Scott, and Theresa Tilly as Shelly.
Okay, let me think. It's a 7.
What suit?
Diamonds. No, wait. Hearts.
Oh my God, 7 of hearts, you're right.
Hey, Ash, I guessed the card right.
Yeah, truly amazing, Linda.
I don't know, but I think it's really some sort of extra sense or something, like ESP.
Okay, try this.
Okay, it's a 7.
I don't believe it.
Of spades. Queen of spades. 4 of hearts, 8 of spades, 2 of spades, jack of diamonds, jack of clubs.
Why have you disturbed our sleep? Awakened us from our ancient slumber. You will die! Like the others before you. One by one we will take you.
So, dude, we did Evil Dead 2, probably the more notorious of these two. And now we're circling back. What struck you like in terms of differences? Do you have a preference between the two? Yeah, I'm curious how this worked for you, man.
Yeah, it's weird. I think it depends on my mood, to be honest. These are totally different movies. I know that Evil Dead 2 was kind of like considered like a remake, I guess.
Yeah.
And I can see that. And there's a lot of elements that are the same and everything, but I think he just took the idea and he said, what if we made this a little bit more campy? You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if campy was a thing back then.
I don't think it was.
Maybe this invented campy. And so like a little bit more fun, you know? Well, a lot more fun, I would say. It's a lot more fun. And I think it was a smart move. I think, you know, it's hard to talk about Evil Dead the 1 without talking about Evil Dead 2. So if you haven't seen Evil Dead 2, pause the episode, go watch it, because we're going to talk about that too. But this one was much more scary, much more hardcore and quote unquote real, if you want to call it that, you know, like the second one was a little bit more unbelievable, a lot more unbelievable, right? And took liberties in places. And this one was, he just wanted to make something scary, and it was scary. I was actually scared, you know. I thought that it was really unbelievably well done for the time that it was made. I mean, I can see why this was a jumping off point to make another one for him, and why other people could see this and think, oh my gosh, this is hardcore. Imagine this coming, what year did this come out? 81?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine this coming out in 81. Like, this is scary to people. This was when, when did The Exorcist come out?
Yeah, that would have been the 70s, maybe
70,
like 74,
77 or something.
Okay.
Yeah. This is like Exorcist level scary for that time, you know? There was a lot of blood and a lot of gore and a lot of like aggressive scares, you know, that happened, and they came out of nowhere. I think the clip you showed was a great example. Like, nothing had happened until then. I think that was like the first time something happens. Whereas in the second one, I mean, we're 3 minutes into the movie and something happens. So I think he took the best things of this one and he turned it into something a lot more grand in the second one. You know, the references to the chainsaw were great from the first one to the second one. You see the necklace and the skull outline in the first one, where they show it again in the second one. The way that they get to the cabin is different. You know, it's just the two of them in the second one, and in this one it's all 5 of them. There were some funny moments, like in the beginning where they're driving to the house and the guy honks the horn and they pass those 2 people and he's like, hey, screw you, I'm not honking at you. They didn't do anything. They just kept waving, holding hands. It's just like, what is happening? What? Okay. So there were elements there, but of like, you know, this kind of like funny or I guess aloof attitude, but they were like few and far between in the first one, and they're all over the place in the second one. The reference of the girl getting caught by all of the shrubbery happens really. That's like
the very first thing. Yeah,
the very first thing. So I guess, yeah, that happens before the clip that you showed, but that's like the very first thing. And so he took it to the next level in the second one, which was really enjoyable, right? Like, you know, now that if I would have watched this one first, it would have been a different experience even, you know? So anyway, in terms of like, if I want to be scared, I'm going to watch this one. If I want to just like enjoy this thing, this kind of like crazy, weird, fun thing, then I'll watch the second one. So I love them both for very different reasons. This one was, I could see a lot of scary films, horror films from the early 2000s, you know, the 2010s,
Cabin.
the lighting and stuff being influenced by this film. The lighting is really, really well done, and the cinematography is fantastic too.
Yeah.
It was almost. Did the same guy shoot the second one?
Two different guys.
It was a different.
Yeah.
I could tell.
Yeah.
The first one was way more motivated. It felt like, and thought about, and I guess just it had a different purpose. The first one was supposed to be scary. The second one was supposed to be kind of like you're floating a lot and everything, and more steady and everything. So I totally get it. They're both are great for different reasons, but this one felt like I noticed the cinematography in a good way. And a lot of times when you notice it, it's not good. You know, but this time I noticed it in a very good way, and I thought it added a lot to the story itself. So yeah, and I mean the acting is what it was. You know, it's the 70s or 81, so kind of was what it was. But so I don't have any real comment on that. But the way that they did the makeup and the blood and everything was just way more real. As I think I called out in our last episode, Evil Dead 2, the blood is really red. You know, it's bright red, and so it's obvious that it's not blood. This one was different. This one, the blood was darker, and I don't know if it's because of the lighting or they just used like a darker shade. I don't know, but it felt more real, you know, and I felt more in it because of that. So, what did you? I mean, you've seen this before, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so long. I really think I watched these so young that I kind of blended both of them together in my head in different ways, because I think this is the one I really saw the most as a kid, which was probably like twice. This, for whatever reason, didn't really hit my fancy. I think by the time I was watching this, which would have been probably, when I was 5 or 6, I was more into like Freddy and Jason. And so I was like, okay, this is fine. And then I had my other B horror movies that were just the worst, that I thought were so good. And then I go back and watch them as adults, as an adult. And I'm like, these are just awful. Like they're borderline unwatchable and probably unwatchable. And so this one for me, I don't know. I think there's some of these moments that always stuck out in my head, like that final shot, zipping through the woods, through the cabin, and then into him. Like that has always stayed with me. And now rewatching it, I was like, oh, I'd forgotten, because I'm thinking it's probably been 20 years since I've seen both of these. The more I've, been looking at them over the last couple of weeks, I'm like, oh, it's probably been a lot longer, because I really forgot everything about these movies outside of like a couple shots. And I enjoyed it. I agree. Like if I really want something fun and silly, I'm definitely going to the second one. But I think overall, I would rather watch this one again. Like if I have to sit and watch one of them, this is much more my vibe, especially some of the stuff you're talking about, the cinematography, so much more fun for me to watch and engage with. Like it's much more horror, which again, to your point, is the intention. Like the camera work reflects the different intentions of both films perfectly. And for that very reason, I just enjoy this one so much more, because like it's much more horror, right? All the compositions, we're walking or driving up to the cabin, and we have this sweet high angle of the car, and it's dead center. And we're just kind of hovering over it. And you can see that reflected even in recent films like Longlegs. Like you can see people either referencing this in particular, or maybe if we were to go watch other horror movies in the 70s and early 80s, we would see more of this kind of camera work. I have no idea, to be completely frank. But the cinematography, I love that shot of the car just creeping up to the cabin slowly.
And it's quiet. You don't even hear the car.
It's like almost idling, and you're just hearing crunching of the leaves kind of thing. And it's very foreboding, right? Ominous. It's you just like, what are we creeping up to? And then whenever they finally get to the cabin, right, the creepy swing that's just rocking and banging into the cabin itself is really nice. And that shot of it is so cool because we have this really close wide angle shot of the swing moving in and out of the frame, and the car just creeps right into the left third, and it sits right perfectly in the middle of those elements, the frontal elements of the I think it's like a beam on the left and the rocking swing on the right, taking up the right 2/3. Like, it's just really horror compositions. Like they're getting squeezed and they're entering and they're locked into this cage, and it's kind of visualizing all these elements that you're afraid of if you were to wind up somewhere you don't want to be. And it's beautiful. Like, I freaking adore it. And the whole movie's like that, right? There's all these really interesting angles, which we can talk about in a little bit. But those are the things I'm engaging with. And then, to your point, the blood is such a wild difference. Like, if you're talking about horror films, you kind of just think blood is blood. But the color and the quantity is wildly different between films. And this one, an appropriate amount of blood squirts out. Like, okay, I could see, I mean, it's still a little heightened, but, it doesn't feel over the top. Whereas they're just bathing in it, quite literally in the second film. But here, like, the makeup is good. The eyes, those contacts that they're putting in, freaking incredible. I would have been horrified. Like, I can imagine that's like a dicey thing in 81, putting in whatever contacts those are like on the verge of blinding you. And so hats off to that whole makeup team. And this had a pretty good budget. Like, I know we're talking about like a low budget film, which isn't like incredibly high, but they had $350,000.
Whoa. For 81, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's, I mean, got to be over $1 million in today's bucks, right? Because even in today, you give me 350, we can wreck some shop, let alone the equivalent of whatever that is, 1.5. We're making a really high quality feature at 1.5. And so I'm like still thinking they did a lot even with that. Like, if you're doing all this makeup, you got to do your makeup test before you shoot. And that's going to start to eat up $5-10 grand between the makeup artist time. And unless he just happens to have one of his close friends, like this Tom Savini level makeup artist, that's able to donate time, in order to get these reps and also get on to a feature film. Like, oh, now this will launch my career. Those are definitely the kind of people you want, you're hoping for early in your career to build a career together. Someone that's hungry, that'll donate time in order to get all that experience and, build their resume and their portfolio. That's the ideal for sure. But I don't know if he had that kind of person capable of putting in this level of makeup work. Because then there's also all those props, like the fake hands and legs and the ankle stab. Like, you can't just cross your fingers on the day. You got to like have a pretty good idea what you're going to get. And maybe they didn't have like a dozen of those on standby. Maybe they only had one. But it's because you knew exactly what you were going to need through preparation. And so once you start doing those things, okay, yeah, fine. You have your cabin. But even then I'm thinking like some of these stunts, they're having to rip up the floor. So now you need a carpenter to come out there and like feel good about ripping up someone's cabin and going under the cellar and having scaffolding to lift people up, and so that you can have the headless person, right, sitting on the floor or whatever they're doing. Like that. Oh my God, that shot where they dismember her and she's just on the floor all wiggling around. That's dope. That's so good. Like, I think even today, that's probably 90% of the way there. You could probably still put some polish on it for today's audiences, but that still sells really, really well. Yeah, I'm still really impressed, even considering they had a pretty crazy budget, because they had someone scoring this thing, and that's a pretty solid score.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, no, it's great. It's great. Yeah, it's like, it's like synthy and stuff, so it's its own thing, but it's really, really well done. I mean, when you're talking about you really, I think that horror films especially need to be watched, like more so than drama, more so even maybe than comedy, but really, especially horror films need to be watched with the knowledge of when it was made. Imagine, I was 1 year old when this came out. Imagine, the other stuff that was coming out at this time, like what people would have responded to with this. I mean, people remember when Exorcist came out, people would leave the theater throwing up. They would like get physically sick. And in fact, I saw a clip actually recently this week of people leaving the theater or interviewing some people that worked at the theater when Exorcist came out. And he said that I've never seen people respond to a film like this. People are throwing up, they're leaving just terrified. It was like crazy. It was crazy. So this came out just a little while after that. So we're kind of comparing the two here. And I feel like this is way more, I mean, Exorcist might have come first, but this is way more like blood and guts, and like jump scares are great here. Yeah, you have to like look at it in terms of that. You can't compare it to scary movies today, which are completely different and have films like this to go off of. It's like comparing the Beatles to Radiohead. Well, you can't really do that because Radiohead is influenced so much by the Beatles that there would be no Radiohead if it weren't for the Beatles. And I feel like this is a film like that. There wouldn't be so many horror films today without a film like Evil Dead.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, look, I can imagine, and by 1980, we'd had 20 other cabin horror films, like of people going out into the woods and getting slaughtered by demons or killers or whatever else lurks in monsters, in the woods. And to me, that's the other super interesting part of this film is it's not probably the most original story in the world. And then how do you then say, okay, this is how I'm going to make my stamp? It's through the execution. Like everything about this movie, to your point earlier about the acting, it's like, we're not going to talk about the acting. We're going to lend some grace here. But it still stands the test of time. And why are we still kind of engaged with it? And it's because the execution is so interesting and, unique. And a lot of that has to do with all these other elements that we're talking about, the horror, and then ramping up stakes here and there, and finding ways to make it visually interesting. And so it's just, okay, fine. Let's say you don't have the most interesting and original story in the world. It doesn't mean you can't still tell it and make it your own and do it the way you think it should be done. Again, to your point in the opening, like it's not about always being the most original, but if you can say, this is the way I see it and this is the way I want it to be done, then you're putting yourself into this thing. And it's not about how can I make it necessarily cool for other people. It's what do I think is cool and what speaks to me, what would I like to do with this idea. And there's so many films that it's all about the execution. I mean, Denny has made his living on execution. Like, don't tell me Sicario is the most original story in the world either. But his execution is incredible. And I think the ways that Sam Raimi is executing this film is through the cinematography, for instance. A lot of interesting angles that he's inserting here. There's towards the end when Ash is seeing he's kind of alone now. After I think he's buried and dealt with his girlfriend. And there's this really cool inverted shot. I don't imagine there was a ton of inverted camera moves back in 81. But we start upside down on his head and then we slowly rotate around his head and it's super close. It's a very close shot. where we slowly rotate around his head until he's right side up. And it's speaking to his mental state, like in every way. You're literally looking at his mentals. And then, of course, it's represented in the move and the angle. That's really cool. That's visually interesting and compelling. And then they insert all these interesting Dutch angles, which not super original, but he does it when it feels appropriate to him. Like when Ash falls, that sequence of him burying his girlfriend, and then she pops out of the ground and grabs his leg, and then he falls over. That shot of him falling over is like Dutched so that the ground is tilted away from him. And so now whenever he falls, it feels that much more dramatic. And almost like gravity is forcing him to fall because you can't really even see the end of the ground anymore. It's so Dutched that the ground only takes up like a small sliver of the bottom section wedge of the screen. It's pretty sweet. And I think, there's some other really cool Dutch angles, laced throughout the film at the appropriate time. And then something like the mirror. And it was cool that he came up with 2 different mirror tricks in both the first and the second. Because in the second one, right, it's this nice trick of him, Ash, coming through the mirror and choking himself. And it's all about that kind of anxiety and dealing with the fear and dread of these demons. And am I sane anymore? And here, it's still playing into his sanity, and they're trying to drive him crazy. And except this time it's water. Like he reaches through the mirror and it's suddenly water. That's a dope trick, and I'm sure that took some work.
I was, when I saw that, I was like, what? That was the one, actually, out of everything that happened in this film, that was the one time I was like, whoa, that was awesome. And it reminded me of films like Contact and like amazing shots that you don't expect that come out of nowhere. And like, man, the thought that had to go into, what I want to do here? Okay, how do we do this? And then executing, fantastic. So cool.
So cool. And then towards the end, or at the very end, whenever he burns the book and all the demons are dying, there's that really cool, it's called a snorri cam. I think people are always asking, what's that camera angle where it feels like the camera is just moving perfectly in sync with their head, and it's like it's attached to their body? That's called a snorri cam. And there's that shot of the Scott demon, falling to his death, and that's just a snorri cam shot of him slowly falling to the floor, and it's like the world is ending for Scott's demon as it falls to its death, and then it hits the floor and kind of disintegrates, and like that whole sequence of everything slowly falling apart and then exploding with hands coming through it, that's zero story. None of that's really speaking to anything plot-wise or building out the world in any way, right? We don't understand why there's hands coming out. It's just visually compelling, and it makes for a really grand finale. It's very interesting. I mean, to the extent that you can say it's story-based, is these are the hands that were puppeting, these humans, and it's kind of this visual symbolism. And that's fine. That's cool. It works. But more importantly, it looks really cool, and it's surprising. It's shocking. And that's the other thing. Like, I think he regretted some things that he did in this film, because it was like, particularly the assault scene with the tree and the vines. He regretted that, which is why the sequel doesn't go there. Because on first viewing, and this is really interesting to me, because I think today we think about how sensitive audiences are. And truth is, audiences have always been sensitive to one degree or another. And here, whenever people were watching the film, there were people who walked out, were really upset about this, assault scene. And he was like really mortified. He was like, that wasn't my intention. I wanted it to be, horror and shocking, but I wasn't trying to offend anyone. That was never my goal, is to actually upset people. I just was trying to, build a career, and I was thinking about all the shocking ways that we could do that. And this felt, something visually interesting that I don't think we've seen before. And I went too far, and I really feel bad about that. And so the sequel, ejected from that. And it's like, instead she just gets whatever, swallowed up by the tree or maybe slammed into the tree. And we cut away. And that's why we don't really see what happens to her. And he just kind of cuts away. And I think that's a really mature, because look, when this movie came out, he was 22. That's crazy.
That's wild.
Like, bro, if you had me making horror movies at the age of 21, I would have been so much worse. I was a button pushing jerk, at that point in my life. And I can only imagine how brutal I would have been. And so hats off for him, not just owning it, but also correcting it, in future, his next work. That's really cool and says a lot about him as a
I didn't
guy.
know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And I'm glad he did that. That was the one thing I was like, whoa, that I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And then
it's
she
not
gets
like
away too. So
she
anyway.
fights. It's not, there's so many worse ways he could have approached that scene in of itself. Like, suddenly she's enjoying it, right? That there's so many vile ways that he could have gone for shock factor that he just didn't do. And I think the idea behind it is, this is an evil dead. Let's make it do evil things. And so I appreciate the line that he tried to walk in making it, but also retracting and saying, you know what, maybe though. Now, I don't know how audiences would react to it today. Probably still not be happy, but I can't remember if Evil Dead, it's so funny. There's 3 movies called Evil Dead. There's The Evil Dead, there's Evil Dead 2, and then there's Evil Dead, the reboot by Fetty, in 2015 or so.
2013.
And I can't remember if they go back to that and suddenly it's acceptable again, because maybe in that era and between 2010 and 2016, you could still play around in that, and it was back to how can we shock and surprise people. And then after 2016, it's you don't play too much in that sandbox. I don't know. I need to go back and rewatch that. I really love Jane Levy in that film. I think she's amazing. And Fetty,
I'm gonna watch it after this, actually.
Yeah, and see. So we'll add a note and maybe a warning in the show notes.
Yeah, good call. Well, you said that he was 21 when he put this out. That's incredible. For so many reasons. The scene towards the end where he throws the book in the fire and then the 2 zombies start disintegrating. Is that like claymation? How did they do that?
It's so cool. Yes, I'm looking at stop motion. Like that's got to be claymation, stop motion style work. And I'm guessing if we had access to his other short films, these were things he had been experimenting with all along the way. Would be my guess. Because how else do you pull off? I don't know, man. Like, it's a lot of impressive stuff going on in this film for 1981.
Well, because it's super amazing and believable, because there's stop motion happening, but then there's also non-stop motion happening on top of it. So you'll have the thing disintegrating in sections, and it's not even like this section here is and everything around it is not, which happens at some point, but it's also this section and then skip a space, and then this section over here is also disintegrating, but you can tell a space in between and on the sides is actual real footage that's overlaid on top of it. And I'm just thinking, how in 1981 as a 21-year-old do you do that with film?
With film.
Like what were the mechanisms that were available at that time? Was he using stuff that they used in like Godzilla? Like techniques from that, because I think that they use a lot of that in Godzilla.
Miniatures
where was he taking his inspiration from? And then, oh my gosh, the hands coming out of the zombies at the end.
And they're massive. They're huge.
Way, like, so terrifying. Anyway, yeah, it's unbelievable.
It's so cool. Like, and then, there's a lot of compositing, which I think he improved on between this and the second one. Because in the second one last week, I was like, there's some shots I don't know how they achieved because it doesn't look composited. Here, it looks super, you can make out, depending on the quality that you're watching, like some of those composites, you can see the edges of the frames of how they overlaid it. Because some of those shots, the moon is massive. And I'm like, that is not accurate in terms of the size of the moon compared to the angle that I'm seeing on Ash as he's walking through the forest. Because Ash looks like he's being shot on like, I don't know, a 35 millimeter or 2024, because this is Super 16, or it's either Super or just normal 16. And the moon is huge. And I'm like, that moon, if they're on 16, that has to be like a 600 millimeter lens, which there's no way you're getting, Bruce Campbell in a shot when you're shooting on something that long. I mean, somewhere between 300 and 600. But from my camera tests, if they were shooting that moon, I would imagine something between 500 and 600. And so, yeah, the compositing is still really impressive for sure. But they're doing some really cool stuff. The other thing that I really liked, going back to the idea of execution over story, the music they do such a good job of, but there's a really mature thing that he does in here, I think, for someone so young making a movie, which is when Scott goes to investigate the cellar. Like, up until that point, we'd been playing with music a lot, like pumping it up and more eerie and cutting it. And then when he goes to investigate the cellar, they do cut the music entirely. They just let us sit in the silence as we look at the cellar. Then we look at them, each person close up, and then back to the cellar we hold. Then we cut back to them in like these 2 shots and then a 3 shot. And then Ash finally is like, okay, we're going to go down. The silence is now scary. Like where the music was originally scary, now sitting in silence because we're trying to hear someone down there. And when you can't hear the person down there in this creepy dark cellar, that's scary. Like, where's the human activity down there? And that's just a very simple, like, it shouldn't be that complicated, but when you're making something, you have to think about these things actively. Like, what's the role of music that isn't on set? It's not like he's, okay, playback music. Like, you're not doing that. You're on set and you're having to think about the whole post-production process. And now he's down there. And so sitting in the silence creates space for when Ash goes down there, you can now start putting sounds back in. And that contrast is what lets these new sounds really enhance all the fear and the scary things. The drips and the clanks. And now we have this soft, eerie, synthy music bed that's just sitting down there, very quiet. But you feel it. It's like reverberating a little bit in your chest, in a sense, because of the register that it's in. And it just gives us so much room to slowly keep cranking up the tension. It's this idea that we talk about here and there of you go away so that you can come back. You send a character away so that they can come back. You let the music go away so that you can bring it back. Like, that's a really mature approach to filmmaking and storytelling. And it's just really impressive that as a 21-year-old, he was able to think through these things. And maybe some of that's his editor coming in and saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that. But I don't think so. I think this is probably very well in Raimi's head, just based on how everything's paced and shot. It feels very expected. The other little cool thing that I really like is the girl in the cellar. Like, after she gets trapped down there, I love that she just sometimes is just kind of hanging out. I love that sometimes she's just watching, like an observer. There's that shot before she starts really screaming and stuff where she's just watching the action. Like, there's another demon that's kind of breaking loose. I forget who it is. It's like Linda or one of the other women. And we cut to a shot of her, like, just creeping, just kind of peeking over. And it's just, that's all she's doing. She's literally just watching. And then we cut away, and then when we come back, she starts like going crazy. And it's so cool. It's very creepy because it's kind of giving a sense of humanity and personality to these demons. They're not just these kooky things that are always yelling, even though there's so much yelling. Maybe like half as much as the sequel, but still a lot of yelling. And I love that. Same thing whenever Ash is dragging his girlfriend out. There's a really nice camera move where we're tracking the girl being dragged, and then we stop. And as she clears the frame, we can now see the girl in the cellar in the background, just watching her move and just kind of observing, waiting for a moment. Because after that, we'll remember, is when she starts trying to break loose. And now that everyone's gone, not watching her, she's able to, break the boards and get free or whatever. Really cool ideas laced throughout this movie that's all about the execution and very little about the story. And to the extent that there is some story, it's the fun stuff that I really like, which is him giving her the gift, right? He's pretending to be asleep and they're doing that little back and forth game. And then I love that he recycles it and then reverses it so that she's dead. She's asleep, and now he's digging a grave and he's trying to catch her. That's such a cool callback and reversal. That's good. That is good storytelling. It's making sure you use all the elements of your story in a meaningful way. And I think he did a wonderful job as, a really young guy, putting this together.
Yeah. So creepy. Really good. Really well done. Yeah.
Impressive. Yeah. I think that's about all I really have. I mean, as far as building a sequel, it's a pretty smart switch to say, we're going to use a lot of the same elements, but because of the genre kind of tonal move, it's probably not going to bother people, because we're giving them a new experience using a lot of the same toys. I'm in. Mm-hmm. I dig it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I started at the beginning of this saying these are like two different movies, even though it's obvious that it's a remake. It's from the same guy and it's his idea and it's a completely different experience. And so I think normally, like throughout most of the year, I'd probably rather watch Evil Dead 2 because it's fun, right? But if I want to be scared or I want to feel like on the edge of my seat a little bit more, I'll watch the first one, So totally different vibes.
Totally. And I can see, like, especially Evil Dead 2 for me would be a good background movie because it doesn't really ask you to engage too much. And so no matter what you're doing, when you look up, there's going to be something fun happening.
Yes, exactly. It starts right away. We talked about that last week. I think it's like 2-3 minutes and then stuff is already happening. And what else can you ask for in a old scare film?
Yeah, and here, so that took 8 minutes to do here what it took about an hour and 6 minutes to kill his girlfriend, bury her, chop her head off. Like that, I think that took around an hour, 6 minutes, which is about what I said. I was like, that's like 45 to 60 minutes worth of story.
Yeah, and when there was a reason why we talked last week about, we were like, should we do Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 at the same time? And you're like, no, let's do Evil Dead 2. And I want to see what you think about Evil Dead 1. Because there were so many things, like the cutting of the head off with the shovel was the jump was the same.
Yeah.
The head cutting off was the same. It was so good, So I think it was good that we did that one first, and now we're doing this one. But like I said at the beginning, you can't talk about the first one without talking about the second one if you've seen them both, really.
Yeah, you really can't.
Yeah.
Nice. So what are you going to recommend this week, man?
Yeah. So, oh wait, hold on. Come back to me because I had it and then I lost it. It went away.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to recommend something that has some similar elements. I won't say exactly what they are, but it's called The Mist. This is the movie, Frank Darabont's movie, I believe, based on Stephen King's book or short story. Hard to tell with Stephen King. And it's about monsters suddenly arriving in this small town in the mountains, and a town kind of coming together. They're trapped in a grocery store, and how do they survive? And for me, it's all about the ride and where it takes you. And it's hard to talk more about that without really spoiling the main event. And so I think it's a little campy, and I think that's some of the crossover elements. Like, I don't think it means to be campy. It's just, I don't know, when you start dealing with monsters coming out of nowhere, it's hard to avoid that sometimes. And it rides a line with like good acting and bad acting and being a little silly. But I think if you hang in there, like it gets to some really interesting horror elements that will hit you square in the eyes. So The Mist.
Good suggestion there. I haven't seen that film in a long time. That's a good one. I'm going to recommend a film I watched recently called Caddo Lake on streaming on Max. I wouldn't say that it's perfect, but it is a good example of a great idea executed in a great complex idea executed in a really well-written way. I think the script is really smart and the acting is really well done and just super interesting the whole time. I'm going to recommend Caddo Lake, streaming on Max.
Nice. Yeah, I watched it yesterday.
Okay.
Cool. And I concur.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I remember I was just telling you, hey, you should go watch this from a perspective of screenplay writing. Like, what does this screenplay look like? How, there's a lot of thought that went into that.
Yeah. I kept thinking about it the whole time. I was like, man, this is so impressive. Holy crap.
Yeah. Right.
Well structured.
Cool. And I thought the acting was great too. Yeah. And the structure. Yes.
God. Impressive. Yeah. Good recommendation. Stay tuned for next week. We take a look at one more scary flick. We're going to look at Smile 2, the sequel, which is currently out in theaters. Go take a look at that and get back to us. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review. We have a request in the wings. We'll see if we get to it. I got to confer with Todd and see how he feels about it. But and if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/theevildead.
And this quote of the day is pretty awesome. So our quote of the day is from Roger Corman. Jim Cameron is proof that if you are good, you'll get promoted. So where did that come from? Was that like an interview or something? Like what?
I don't know the context of that. He's not wrong. But it's so good because Roger Corman is really well known for two things. Cheap film production, and mostly horror films, I want to say. But he made so many like Piranha 2, and also uncovering talent, such as James Cameron, who came through the Roger Corman School of Production, because he would just kind of give you a budget and a script and say, go make it. And probably support you to a large degree, like, oh, here's how you should think about this if you had questions, but if not, take care. And James Cameron coming out of, Piranha 2 to then go make whatever, The Terminator, like that's amazing. But I really love just that idea of don't get discouraged. If you're good, you'll get there. Like it's just important to, especially now, be competitive and keep creating. Looking at Sam Raimi's back catalog was really encouraging for me and inspiring to be like, it's okay if you don't just jump straight out. Like if you get your reps in, if you keep putting in the work, you'll get there, you'll figure it out. And Roger Corman, if anyone knows, like that guy he's a legend. He's a legend for the amount of films that he was putting out. And just his idea of how to turn a profit and still stay in business. That's important. This is, it's a movie business. And at the end of the day, you do have to figure out a way to make your investors happy if you have investors. And, Sam Raimi did that. James Cameron clearly did that. He's got to be the most budget or box office winner of all time. Like Avatar, Titanic, another Avatar, and whatever else. Those Titanic
Terminator
alone was just sitting at the top for years and years before he broke it with Avatar. Like, what? Yeah, so hopefully meritocracy isn't dead, Todd, is my point.
Love it. Great quote. That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you. I had a great time talking about this. Hopefully you had a great time listening to it. If there's a film you'd like to see us review, make a suggestion. Who knows? Maybe we'll do it. Subscribe, please. It all helps. Review us wherever you get your podcasts. Share us with your friends. We'd love to hear what you think about some of our conversations, but also just what you think about some of the films that we talk about in general in your own head. Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies. When he's sitting on the bed next to her and she wakes up, she's like, as a zombie, like her foot starts, she wakes up, she's like, oh, yeah. Like the whole, that was the one moment in the movie I was like, okay, that's funny.
That's funny. That's comedy.